What's up, guys? Mason the Brock Henderson here, and this is Bull Season 3, Episode 13, Prior Bad Acts. So, overall, not a terrible episode, but nothing really. I don't know. It was kind of interesting whenever they introduced this idea of, the wife being a Black Widow and all that stuff. But ultimately, it just ended up being very straightforward. Like, it didn't take a whole lot to take her down. And then the other side of the story, I mean, again, kind of an interesting thing to bring up. You got Benny losing his dad. It's like, well, what's that going to do for him? And ultimately, it doesn't really go anywhere except Bull and Izzy end up sleeping together, and that's about it. So I don't know. It seemed like a couple interesting ideas to kick off the episode, and then it ended very blandly, in my opinion. I felt like they could have done a little bit more on both sides of the story. With this Black Widow trying to really show that side of her, trying to bring that out of her in court, or trying to investigate her more and trying to find out if she slipped up somewhere. But ultimately, it just okay. Well, let's look into her stock market activity, and there we go. Now we've got proof that she would benefit from his death. There we go. Now we're good. And that was about it. With Bull and Izzy, all it is they sleep together, and then he's calling her, and he's calling her, and he's calling her, and she's not answering, and then she calls him, and then they meet up, and she's like, look, I'm not ready to lose my husband just yet. And then he's like, oh, what? So I'm just here to save you, and that's it? Like, we can't actually, the whole lifeguard thing. And then he's about to leave, and then she makes out with him again, and then he leaves. And that's it. So I don't know. Like, I guess she and her husband are having issues right now for some reason, and yeah, because sure, going back to your ex-husband, that makes sense, right? Right? Like, I don't know, it's weird. Because honestly, it seemed like Bull and Diana were actually becoming a thing over the past couple episodes. Like they were actually starting to be together as a couple. I'm like, oh, okay, so Bull and Diana are gonna be together. And then all of a sudden, this random episode, they, Benny and Izzy lose their father, and then he goes to Izzy, and then they sleep together, and then all of a sudden he wants to be with her, and he's canceling Diana's flights. I'm like, why? What's the point of that? Could they just not get the actress that plays Diana back? Could they not get her on more than a couple episodes? So like, well, I guess we just gotta find a way to write her out for now, since they are becoming more of a couple. I know, let's just have Bull and Izzy sleep together. Yeah, but we can't get her more than one episode. Then let's just have them not really work out in the end. It was weird storytelling, in my opinion. Like, I didn't feel like anything really connected over the past few episodes as far as Bull and his relationships go. Um, I did I did have to appreciate Marissa's reaction though whenever she heard about it, because like first off she thinks that there's something interesting going on. She's like, oh, this sounds like an interesting story, and then he says Izzy's not answering his calls. You just hear, oh, Bull, just absolutely perfect. Because honestly, they do have a pretty good friendship. So I don't know. I know exactly what she's thinking based on her reaction. Like it was perfect the way she played it. So, but yeah, that stuff was not that interesting. And then the stuff with the Black Widow, like I said, interesting concept, but you didn't really do much with it. It went from, well, she probably put it in the hand sanitizer, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, you can't prove that. So then they're like, well, let's find a motive. They found a motive, and then that caught her. End of the story. So yeah, I don't know, just very run of the mill episode, not much there. So yeah, that's about it for this one. So on to the next episode. See you there. And now episode 14, Leave It All Behind. So this was okay again. I don't know. I guess I'm starting to get used to this kind of formula whenever there's a bit more mystery involved and it's a case that involves like a murder where somebody is being framed or they didn't do it and, for some reason they got accused of it. Typically, this is kind of the formula that it goes through. They look guilty, find something else that maybe they'll be innocent, but then they'll look more guilty. So it kind of goes, builds, and then finally they find that one piece of evidence that turns the case around. They finally find out who actually did it, and then boom, we're done. And I don't know, it's it's definitely starting to get a little done, which is a problem because it's only season 3, and I'm already starting to feel that way about these cases. But honestly, that's kind of how I felt. Like, I like the fact that it was somebody that Bull knew beforehand, and yeah, seeing his old friend that he saw their relationship, and he's like, that's the goal. Seeing the real side of it, interesting concept. But I don't know, they didn't really do too much with it. You know, obviously they had a few talks about it. And it was something that was focused on, and I thought it was well set up in that case. But I think ultimately they didn't really do much, and especially because with Bull and Diana and Izzy right now and everything going on there, it feels like they could have done something interesting with that if Izzy and Diana were more involved in the show, but they're not. You know, like I said in the last episode, Diana, for some reason, she just can't be on the show anymore. So let's just have them go with Izzy. But Izzy can't be on the show anymore, so let's have them not work out in the end. So I feel like this episode could have been more interesting if Izzy and Diana were more involved in the show and they were characters that showed up more often. But as it is, they don't really. They just show up like 1 or 2 episodes per season, and then that's about it. Um, but anyways, with that being said, yeah, the case. As I'm watching it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so they're gonna find out who did it in the end, and that's gonna be what turns the case around, and that is exactly what happened. And while I will say the fact that there was more than there was more than one other suspect in this case, that was a little bit more unique because most of the time it's just like the one other person we meet turns out to be them. And this one, there were a couple people we met, which the driver, honestly, we only met him once at the beginning, and then we never really saw him again. So it wasn't too much different, but it was something more than just, all right, well, we suspect him, but here's this other guy that we met earlier, and maybe he has something to do with it, but we're not going to talk about him just yet. And then at the end of the episode, then he gets brought in. It kind of went that way, but they had a different focus throughout most of the episode, and then it turned it around. Um, so I don't know. It just, like I said, it's becoming a little bit formulaic for the show, and while not every episode is a case like this where you're defending somebody and you're trying to turn it around and find out who actually committed the crime, not your client. Well, not every episode is like that. Every episode that is like that is turning out the exact same way. At least the past several that I've watched. So I hope they can start to do something a little bit different going forward. I hope they can change some things up because right now it's just, I don't know, because the episodes are kind of becoming less interesting and a little bit more formulaic. It's becoming a very CBS type of show, and I was really hoping it wouldn't get into that, but well, here we are. So, anyways, with that being said, though, that's about all I can think of from this one. So, on to the next episode. See you there. And now, episode 15. Episode 15. I might be a little tired. Episode 15, Security Fraud. Not a bad episode again, just, I don't know, it felt like they had some more interesting things to talk about that didn't go anywhere. You know, this whole thing, they're working with this guy, he apparently is Bull's, like, mentor, and it turns out he might have some memory issues. It turns out he might be losing his mind a little bit, and it's just like, holy crap, what does this mean? Nothing. You know, like, well, I don't know. I just, at the end of the episode, he's like, well, I think this might be my last time in court. And it's like, okay, well, sure, but you didn't talk about any of the repercussions. You didn't talk about any of what it meant to him, what it meant to Bull. Like, they just hardly talked about anything. It's like, he seemed like he might have some issues. He came up with this random law that turned out to not be a real thing. Still don't know where he came up with that. And then we find out, you know, he keeps suggesting this one pizza place that they've already been to. It's like, do you not remember? And it seems like he might be losing his memory, but it doesn't really lead to anything. Like, he just has one line about, I hate getting old. And then at the end of the episode, he's saying, well, might be my last case. But ultimately, like, yeah, he gets his moment, and it was a good moment. Don't get me wrong. Like, I enjoyed the moment where he flipped the case around. But it didn't really lead to much else. I'm just like, well, that kind of seems like a missed opportunity. The case itself, again, an interesting concept. You've got a guy who was put into WITSEC. He was the only one willing to step up and testify against this big corporation, basically like a Bernie Madoff type of situation. He was the only one willing to step up and say anything about it, and he ended up in WITSEC, and then he dies. And so the family's like, look, we think the government did something wrong. And so you go through all this stuff. You find out the daughter apparently drove up to Chicago and he followed her, which then, of course, they're saying, well, it's his fault because he went up there. And then ultimately you find out that an FBI agent was trying to get him to testify in another case. And that FBI agent went in to scare him and shoot at him and then shot, like, the booth, which ricocheted and then hit him and killed him. And that was the whole case. Like, that's far less interesting than finding out that the U.S. government did something wrong and then family getting their comeuppance, or not comeuppance, but you know what I mean. Like, recompense. That's the word I was looking for. But I just feel like, again, it was an interesting concept. It was an interesting case concept, but then it just kind of ended very blandly. Oh, well, actually found out that this guy might have had something to do with it, and then he did, and then, boom, case solved. It turns out it had nothing to do with the case that he was in WITSEC for. It was a completely different thing with this FBI agent. And I don't know, like, does the family win at that point? Like, do they get money for that? Like, what happens? I don't know. It seems a little weird to me. I don't know. Maybe it's because, like, watching all these episodes so quick back to back, maybe I'm getting a bit more bored with it than I normally would. Because most of the time you're watching it once a week. And so sometimes whenever you got a show like Criminal Minds, like NCIS, like Bull, these episodes don't tend to be as frustrating to deal with, and they don't tend to be as boring, I think, whenever you got to wait a week to see what the next episode holds. So maybe that's why I feel this way, but it feels like they kind of have these good ideas that don't really turn into anything. It turns into just kind of a boring episode, and it ends with not a whole lot of reconciliation for a lot of stuff. So, I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but again, I didn't really grasp onto this episode. I didn't really grab a hold of what they were going through, and like some of the stuff. Honestly, at first I thought it was going to be a thing where maybe Bull and this guy, who honestly his name I've already forgotten. I think his last name was Walker. It seemed like maybe they were going to butt heads a little bit because Bull wanted him to do one thing for voir dire and he completely went against him. He was like, why didn't you look to me for the signals? And so that's when you start to realize about the memory thing. I think it would have been much more interesting if this guy was like, look, Bull, I trust you, but let me do what I want to do. I feel like that could have been an interesting thing because Bull, like, this is his mentor. This is a guy he looks up to. This is somebody, not mentor, but his idol, pretty much. What would he do in that situation? He finally gets a chance to work with somebody that he really idolizes in the lawyer world. But then this guy, he's not really, like, while he is using Bull for certain things, like, hey, can you read this jury for me? At the same time, there's things he's like, yeah, but this voir dire is something that I specialize in. So you may think you know what you're doing, but trust me, I know what I'm doing. And butting heads on that, because it would be an interesting concept. Because on the one hand, if there ever was, or I think they've had a couple episodes where the lawyer thinks they know what they're doing and Bull's like, no, you're an idiot. But this would be a case where this is a guy Bull really looks up to who's not trusting him and his science. What would he do in that case? How would he react to that? But instead they turned it into a story where, well, he's losing his memory a bit and he seems to be having some mental issues. And then that doesn't even go anywhere. So I don't know. It feels like a missed opportunity, in my opinion. But with all that being said, that's it for this episode. On to the last of these 4. See you there. And finally, episode 16, Forfeiture. This is not a good round of episodes. I mean, this one also, it wasn't bad. It wasn't awful. Again. But I'm so sick of these episodes and shows like this where you've got one of the employees that works for the main boss man or whatever gets this puff under their chest like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I'm smart. yeah, I'm better than you. Oh, yeah. Like, they get that arrogance about them, and ultimately they win the day. And don't get me wrong, like, I kind of get what they were going for at the end. He even says, like, thanks for pushing back, because there is a moment where sometimes the mentor can see, or well, the mentee can see something that the mentor can. Maybe there is something that's like, well, yeah, but I feel like this is what's best for this kid, and I would totally get that if there was something going on that maybe Bull didn't know about that Chunk did. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, then obviously Bull can't see the full picture here, but Chunk can. Or maybe Chunk has some sort of experience that he doesn't want this kid to have to go through. But as it stands, the only reason why Chunk decided to not take the plea deal and then put the grandfather on the stand, the only reason he did any of that is because he wanted to win the case. That was his whole reason. And he'll say it was for the kid. He'll say, well, the kid shouldn't go to jail for even a year. He'll say that, but it's because he didn't want to lose the case. He wanted to win his first case. He got all high and mighty. This is my first case. I got this kid out without bail. I'm the best. And then he realized he was in deep shit. And he was about to lose the case, and he didn't want to. Even accepting that minimal plea deal would be too much. And yeah, luckily it worked out where putting his grandfather on the stand helped the kid's case, and then all he had to do was find the right closing statement. And then, of course, that also helped the grandfather out because it gave him an idea of how to win his case by calling in the probation officer. But that doesn't change the fact that he put himself at a huge risk. And he even admitted it at one point. But the problem is, with a show like this, they're not going to make that risk cost them. And they never do. And I always hate that. Because there's so many times whenever a character like Chunk does something stupid like this because of his own selfishness, because he wants to win the case, instead of thinking about what's best for this family. In the situation we're in right now, what is best for the family? Well, kid goes to jail for a year. He probably will learn from this experience. He'll learn from his mistake. He will not be caught up in that again. The grandfather gets to keep his business, and I'm sure he'll help his grandson however he can. And I'm sure the grandson, he's obviously a good kid, so even that year in jail, I'm pretty sure they might even let him go for good service, like after 6 months. Like, I don't know. It just, I'm sitting here thinking, like, this is a good deal for the whole family. It's not the perfect deal. It's not an ideal world, but it's a good deal. But in TV show land, a good deal is not good enough. In TV show land, a good deal isn't good enough. It's not the perfect outcome, so we can't do that. And that's stupid to me. And don't get me wrong, I get it's a TV show. I get sometimes you have to suspend your disbelief. But again, this is a show where things are supposed to feel real. Things should feel kind of realistic. It's based on a science that's based in the courtroom, and I would hope that it's based on a real science and that this should feel like the real world. But in this scenario, this doesn't feel real. You're handed a scenario like this where you go from 10 to 1 year. 1 year. This kid is 20. He goes to jail for 1 year. That's 1 year off of his life. Yeah, it sucks. It's not ideal, but it's better than him going to jail for 10 years for something like this and then missing out on his 20s because he's been in jail the whole time. Like, it's a much better deal, and it's much better for the grandfather too. But then Chunk in his arrogance is like, no, I want to win this case. In the real world, it wouldn't work out. In the real world, he would be like, words are not coming to me right now. In the real world, this mistake, this arrogance would cost Chunk and his client, and possibly even his grandfather too. Like, there was a part of me that was like, what if he doesn't, and like, if they decide to take this realistically, What if the son ends up going to jail for 10 years and the grandfather loses his business all because Chunk made this mistake? All because Chunk decided, I'm better than this, I'm better than this plea deal, so no, I don't want to lose. So I hate it because, again, obviously you gotta suspend your disbelief if you're watching a TV show, but I don't want to suspend it to the point where, oh well, there's just no tension whenever I watch these episodes. Anytime something appears to go wrong, I don't feel tension. Because clearly, if they're allowing their characters to make stupid mistakes like this, that put not only their client, but also their client's grandfather at risk, he's willing to do that because he doesn't want to lose a freaking case. Like, you're willing to do that, and then everything all works out hunky-dory. You really want me to feel any tension going forward. You really want me to feel like, oh, guys, this might not work out in the end. I know things look bad right now, but guys, this could not work out. I'm not going to feel that way. Ever. Because this happens all the time. Because it goes from, guys, things look bad. Oh, we did it. And then in this case, it's, guys, I think we're doing okay. We've got a good deal on the... No, not good enough. We need even better. We need it to be perfect. And it works out. Yeah. You know, like, that's not real life. And again, you want me to think that there should be tension? You want me to feel like, guys, I don't know if it's going to work out this time. You can't have episodes like this. You can't have episodes where they take something that was a good deal and throw it away to get a perfect deal, and then it all works out in the end. Like, if it happened occasionally, maybe I could buy it, but it doesn't. It happens all the time. Not in this scenario where it's like, here's a good deal, no, we want a perfect deal. But it happens all the time where things work out all hunky-dory and we're all good and everything's okay. I'm just like, at some point you gotta have a couple losses. You gotta have a couple moments where maybe you do win the case, but it costs you something. Or maybe things don't quite work out the way you wanted. Because if you don't, well then that's not the real courtroom, you know? The law is very unforgiving. Sometimes it doesn't work out for the best. There are flaws in the law. That's one of the things that a lot of people know about our judicial system. So why not try to show that a little bit? Why not try to show those instances that happen that cause issues instead of just having every single court case work out 100% for everyone and everybody's always happy? Because it doesn't always happen. So I don't know. This one in particular, because it was such a cliche where, you know, the protege upsteps the master and he's like, no, you don't know, I know best. And half the time it works out okay, the other half the protege gets a little talking to because he was stupid. In this case, they kind of did both. You know, he got the talking to, but ultimately it worked out okay. And it's just, I don't know, I was really hoping that there were going to be consequences for it, and there weren't. Just like, well, great. I guess you don't understand real life then. Because I guarantee you, if a lawyer made a mistake like that in real life, if he really took this case into his own hands and decided, no, I want the perfect deal, it won't work out like that every time. Maybe one in 10, but not every time. And coming off the back of 3 episodes that were just kind of bland, you know, some interesting premises that didn't go anywhere, some cases that were just kind of boring ultimately, that kind of just, there's this formula that's starting to form for this show. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm watching so many episodes back to back to back. But I just feel like it's losing me. It's losing my interest. It's kind of becoming just a very repetitive and kind of boring show. And even the stuff, because I think he calls Diana in this, I'm pretty sure that happened in this one, but he called Diana and left a voicemail. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's going on. Because, yeah, we talked about it a little bit. He canceled her flight, and then he calls and leaves a voicemail. It's like, hey, I know we're having some trouble. I'm like, we've not talked about Diana since the episode where he slept with Izzy. And that's the last we've heard of anything about her. So, what are we doing? Are we even focused on their personal lives anymore? You know, Danny, she apparently had this great romance with this Gabriel guy because it was so sad when he had to leave. We haven't talked about anything to do with that since it happened. Marissa and Greg, ever since we had the episode where his restaurant caught on fire, we've not heard anything about Greg. Don't get me wrong, they were a little too much like, all over each other in the couple episodes where we saw him, but it's still her personal life. Chunk going to college, this is the first we've heard about it because he talks about how he's a student and he's still learning law. Benny losing his dad happened, and now it's done. We haven't talked about it since. Just like, none of these stories are really doing much. We're just essentially going episodal basis, and none of these cases are really gripping me. They're all just kind of there and then gone. And they all work out 100% okay for everyone. So, yeah. That's about how I feel. So, anyways, with that being said, what were your guys' thoughts? Let me know. We can talk about, discuss, all that good stuff. Leave a like and subscribe, future Bull reviews, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.